We are actually back this time around for a change. This is part 2. If you have not watched part 1, you may want to have a huge sanity on standby for you because that one is condensed down to about a little bit above 2 hours, which is normally longer than the average videos that we actually normally have on the channel. However, I'm actually not alone on my case. Well, usually says would actually be talking in this part, but unfortunately she has to step aside real quick to do something, so figured I'm the guy to do it for here. So we have Emmy
Leo here
with us. Leo is here, and he's also going to be recording this very same thing.
I'm recording the entire thing, yeah.
All right.
Yeah, I'm recording the entire thing, so you're going to see a lot longer of footage from my end once I figure out how to deal with the copyright that I'm dealing with. But yeah, it's fine. And also, go to History Inside of a Nutshell if you do not want swearing or anything of that like, because I swear a lot during my commentary, and so we usually mute up our mics, but if you want the clean version, go to History Inside of a Nutshell. And if you want the more full, explicit reaction of me, my channel, White Lion Studios, will have it up eventually.
All right, and keep in mind there's actually going to be a part that's going to be edited out from this version, but if you do like to see it, check out White Lion Studios. That is Leo's channel as well. And we also
I'll have it up, and I'll have some commentary too.
All right, we got Says on here, but like I said, she has stepped aside real quick, but she will be on, so don't worry. We also have Jess as well, and our amazing Mr. Britannic Jake himself, though I guess not waste any more time, so let's get on with this and get this over with. Oh.
Miss Campbell?
He'd know this ship fairly well, wouldn't he?
I suppose.
If you couldn't take over this ship, what would you do? How would you keep it from reaching port?
Any other ship, I'd say a sinker, but not this ship.
Yes, I've heard it's unsinkable. Is that true?
Generally speaking, yeah. Once we close these bulkheads, it is.
Haven't we discussed this the last time? They never said the Britannic is unsinkable, and I can imagine they said the same thing about the Mauritania and the Lusitania.
You can just, if you're on my side, you can just hear me absolutely ranting about this, and now DK is ranting.
This is going to be one of those ordeals.
It's just one of those days.
I want you to get up and get dressed. We're going up on deck.
What is it? What's wrong?
I haven't got time to explain. Just do as I say. Children, you can finish that later.
Do what Miss Campbell says. Go.
Should I help you?
No. Take the children.
Oh, and Emmy also pointed out a bad CGI animation. Where'd you saw that at?
This movie's full of bad CGI, Emmy.
There was a scene when the when the binocular
a periscope
comes out. Yeah, is that what it is?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I noticed the CG looks pretty bad. So I hope that's safe for me to speak as a cartoonist and self-practicing animator myself.
Low budget, yeah. Yeah, it's probably because this is low budget.
Yeah.
And you have to think about this. This movie was made in 2000 as well.
Actually, I just noticed an interesting detail. If you look at Britannic, only 3 of her funnels actually have smoke coming out of them. That's an interesting little detail. That's interesting.
Yeah. And can I also say something real quick? There is no way a sub would be able to keep up with the Britannic at all. You have to think about this.
They have the power of plot armor, I guess.
The Britannic can actually go up to 21 knots, which is her normal service speed, and a sub can go maybe 9 knots once up on the surface, but once you're under the surface, it's actually greatly reduced down. And this is actually in proof of the Lusitania's case. If U-20 were to try to hunt down, and if the Lusitania just starts running away, there'll be no way that sub would actually be able to catch up with the Lusitania.
Yeah.
Okay.
Master Britannic, I wouldn't exactly call the fourth funnel fake since it was technically hooked up to some stuff. In terms of I think the on Titanic, the fourth funnel was hooked up to the ship's only fireplace or something.
Yeah, and also
But the Britannic is also the same, I think, or not.
Yeah.
The
But
fourth
I imagine
funnel,
if Britannic was actually a passenger liner, she would have also had the fourth funnel hooked up to the,
yeah.
place.
The fourth funnel had the same function as the one on Titanic and Olympic, and it was also used for storage as well.
Yeah, yeah.
Gotta love using the funnel for storage. It's fine.
that is interesting. That one thing I want to point out with those firemen trying to go through that watertight door. Around that time, those watertight doors would have been closed throughout the war. And of course, in Britannic's case, during her sinking, the doors were actually open, to which is very, very unfortunate. And also, just pointing out, wrong grand staircase. That's like a
Grand staircase is
stairway.
absolutely wrong. It looks more like something you'd see in like a regular ass building or some shit.
Yeah.
It don't look like something you'd see on a ship of that scale.
And of
I
course,
sent a real picture.
and of course, I will slap
Nice.
that photo somewhere on this screen for you to see. Leo said, "Hold up for something," and that's about the.
Wouldn't they? Oh, sorry. Finish your sentence.
I was gonna say that's the fastest I've ever seen the Britannic turn. And did they get Tiller?
Bro's trying to turn her into a
mixed up?
drift car.
It
No,
was
wait.
ugly. Ugh.
The whole question that I'm going to say is he said hard to port, and then she turned to, the port. But wouldn't they have been using tiller commands back then? So wouldn't it have been hard to starboard?
Hard to starboard.
Have her
would
turn to
be
port?
Turn the ship to port. Hard to port would be basically
Yeah.
turn the ship starboard.
And they
Well,
turned the ship to
yeah.
port after saying turn or port. But it's like, wouldn't they have been using tiller commands in 1916? So they should have said turn her to starboard for her to go to port like that. Based off the if they were using tiller commands in 1916. Like when you watch James Cameron's film Titanic from 1997, when they say hard to starboard, they turn her to the port side. They turn her port because of the way tiller commands work. Wouldn't that have been the same case for Britannic?
Yes. Tiller commands was in practice until at least the 1950s, I believe. So tiller commands was still in use when Britannic was around. So yes, it would have been hard
that
to
is a
starboard.
factual inaccuracy. That's another inaccuracy that he said hard to port and she did turn to port instead of starboard since
And what
tiller
is
commands.
telegraph? What is that?
Can
telegraph?
someone else explain what tiller commands are, please?
So tiller commands is basically say like with the Titanic, the iceberg was on the starboard side. So Murdoch told Hitchens to swing to harder starboard, which means swing the wheel to harder port. So
other
basically,
way.
it's like the opposite. Yes.
Oh, okay.
Because it's just the way the tiller works. So basically, the ship would move away from the iceberg, so it will move towards port instead of starboard.
Okay.
So you always that's what basically telecommands is. It's quite confusing.
Yeah.
Isn't it
Very.
similar to like stage talk or something? Like stage left versus audience left?
Yeah,
And port is left, and Starbuck is right.
that's right. Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
And for those that don't know what the HMS Victoria just dropped, those are actually called depth charges, to which they detonate at a specific depth, and this is basically a anti-submarine defense, but
Yeah.
I don't think those would be around in World War One, I believe.
This was World War One, yeah. And yeah, this never happened with Britannic. She wasn't being protected by a ghost of a basically already sunken ship. This is like some Phantom of the Opera level bullshit, really. Considering the HMS Victoria was sunk by the time 1916 came around, this literally is just like Phantom of the Opera level here.
Yep, and interesting enough, the first successful sinking of a U-boat with depth charges was a U-68 off the county carrier of Ireland on March 22nd of 1916 by the Q ship of the Farnborough, which is basically from the British Royal Navy.
Oh. So depth charges would have existed in November then. If the first was March of the same year, then they would have existed by this time. Jake is raising his hand.
I see it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just to let you know that there was an occasion where the Britannic was in line for a target for an attack. U-73 had spotted the Britannic on the horizon at one point, and he had his periscope up, and he was about to fire upon the ship, but then realized the ship was a hospital ship. He said she weighed around 45,000 tons with 4 funnels, and dressed in hospital livery. So he actually aborted the attack. So he was
I
going
didn't
to
know that.
yeah. So he was going to
Mad
fire upon the
respect.
ship. Yeah.
Mad respect to the commander that you for choosing not to fire.
Exactly.
The same U-boat?
The same U-boat, U-73, had spotted a ship of 45,000 tons, dressed in hospital livery with 4 funnels.
But later she sank.
Yeah.
So
I respect that he chose not to fire. That right there is a good person.
yeah. So
No, it still sank.
there is some sort of truth to this, but not quite, because she wasn't actually fired upon. He was about to fire upon the vessel, but then he aborted the attack. Yeah.
I respect that he aborted it.
When
You
he
don't
realized
see
it was
that
a
commonly
ship,
in
yeah.
war. You don't hear that type of stuff commonly in war, so it's fascinating to know that the guy was like, this a hospital ship. Stop it.
It happened also with
Ceasefire.
Lusitania, the rescue ship. The U-boat also went to fire it, but it didn't.
Oh. Yeah.
I think it was just out of respect to the Geneva Convention rule. You know,
I don't think Geneva
law.
existed in 1916. Wasn't it the Articles of War?
Yes, because U-20 actually broke laws by sinking the Lusitania, because there was what they called a cruiser rule, which meant that they were supposed to fire a warning shot before the ship. You know, so they were supposed to warn people. They were supposed to let people get off the vessel, abandon the vessel before the ship is attacked. But that didn't happen,
unfortunately.
So there was rule books.
Of course.
True.
Yeah.
Let's not also forget that even though hospital ships are not allowed to be attacked, they're also subject to be searched as well. So they had to be open for that.
That makes sense. Because if
Can
they
you
didn't
send a
allow to
troop
be
ship?
searched, wouldn't not allowing to be searched be a violation of their neutrality or something?
Can you sink a troop ship? Like, you cannot sink a hospital ship, but a troop ship.
I think there is a case. I think there was a ship sinking in World War II. I may have to look that up. Let me see. World War II, where there was actually a hospital ship that was actually sunk in World War II, but it was not on the British side. I think it was on the Russians side.
Mm.
And the biggest problem is they had a anti-aircraft gun. While it was still in its hospital colors, it was still liable for an attack because it has an armament still on there.
Which ship?
Let me look up.
Which ship?
It's the Soviet hospital ship Armenia.
Ah, I see. You can tell I kind of zoned out for a second.
It's been estimated that there are
We're actually
approximately
admitting to zoning out.
It's estimated approximately 5,000 to 7,000 were killed in the sinking, making it one of the deadliest maritime disasters in history, and there were only 8 survivors out of there.
Stay by the lifeboats. It's the safest place to be. Remain calm. This is the biggest ship in the world. It is unsinkable.
For the last time, Britannic was not unsinkable! Ugh!
She was not the biggest either. She wasn't unsinkable. She wasn't biggest.
She was also not the biggest ship of her country. It was Aquitania.
Yeah.
Oh, what a rage.
Though this scene coming up is probably one of my favorite scenes in the film, so... Absolutely.
Sarah, William, my darlings. Oh, are you all right?
Now, I want to stop right here because I think I remember back in the early years of YouTube, and
Yeah.
I kid you not on this one, there's this someone actually retook that whole scene and remade it with Virtual Sailor, and it was so amazing.
Oh, wow. I'm pretty sure someone did something similar in Minecraft at some point, but I'm not too sure off the top of my head. Either way, that is probably one of my favorite scenes in the movie.
And
It's just so bad.
now, have I seen it pop up? I don't know where it's at, or if the uploader still has it up there, or if it's still active or not. I don't know. I may have to look back at it, but it turns out if his channel is gone, possibly that video is gone as well, to which it might be a loss
Fair.
media.
Yeah. Either way, I also comment that why does Townsend look more like Charles Bartlett than the actual person playing as Charles Bartlett?
Yeah.
Why?
Oh yeah. Oh, Jess also shared another photo as well.
Yeah, he did.
The captain of U-boat 73 was named Gustav Seiss, who was actually the commander around that time frame, and he did order the torpedo launch, but quickly aborted it. Now, I will respect him half and half. Well, actually, one half is basically, not firing a torpedo at the Britannic, but lost all respect when one of his mines sank the Britannic.
It's just a cold twist of irony that the U-boat that laid the mine was the same one that, aborted firing on her. So I feel like he didn't want her sunk, necessarily. He just
Jake
couldn't
wants to
exactly
say
control the sea
something.
mine.
Yeah, the Germans sort of spelt his name slightly different. It is CS, but but the way they write it, it looks like 2 B's at the end, but it's just the way they write it. So
Okay.
it was like Cia, but like CS. So that's how you sort of pronounce his
Difficult name.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the way it's spelled.
Asking if the spelling is more accurate.
You know how, with your phone, and if you actually hold down S, you can actually see the alternative for the S? That's how it is. Well, they actually got a part right. Britannic actually did sail to Naples for coal refueling, because you have to remember, she departed from Southampton, had to go literally around Spain and Portugal, And also the day, November 19th, 1916, I believe it is.
They got something right.
And I can imagine this was the Naples around that time frame. And if you also look at the background of those two mountains, one of them happened to be Mount Vesuvius.
The one that destroyed Pompeii, if I remember right.
In 79 AD, yes. So, kind
Yeah.
of touching, we have two biggest historical events that actually happened. Well, actually three if you count World War One.
Yeah. This is probably this is a very beautiful shot too by the movie standards. This is a very nice shot.
And also, Jake has his hand. Go ahead.
Yep.
It says that they arrived on the 19th of November. No, they didn't. The Britannic arrived at Naples on the 17th of November 1916. She did not leave Naples until the 19th, and that's because there was a storm that prevented them from leaving. Because the narrow docks of Naples, Captain Bartlett didn't want to risk sailing through the narrow docks because he may damage the Britannic. So what he did was he waited out the storm. In some ways they did, in some ways they didn't, because it says they arrived on the 19th and they didn't. They were there on the 17th of November 1916, and they did not leave. And that's, like I said, there was a storm that prevented them from leaving, which Captain Bartlett didn't want to damage the Britannic due to the storm, trying to get through the narrow docks. So what he did was he waited out, but as they left Naples, the seas rose again, the storm came back and started rocking the ship, which was not very comfortable for the people on board because everyone was very green and seasick.
Yeah.
Yep.
By that point. So.
Yeah.
And also says this
Hi,
as well.
Yep.
Hello.
Now, if I remember, Ada Garland actually did a little bit of a record about Mount Vesuvius in her diary. Now, we actually do have access to her diary, but unfortunately, due to copyright reasons, we are not allowed to show it. But what we can do, we can actually do refer to it if needed.
What I hear, it's only...
And there goes the Britannic into the sleeping sun once again. Bring on Nightwish.
I wish for this night time to last for a lifetime. The darkness around me, shores of soft solar seas. Oh, how I wish to go down with the sun, sleeping, weeping with you.
There's going to be a chance that's going to make the soundboard.
A matter of time before the Americans enter the war, and then the stalemate.
I hope I get to strike a blow before this whole thing is over.
Perhaps you underestimate your contribution on board the Britannic.
It's one thing to die for a noble cause, but it has to be said. What are we really fighting for? Arabia's oil? The mining rights to Africa?
You mean this war is solely about the division of property?
Now that sounds dangerously like socialism, but that's a dish we don't serve at this table.
You would think that the Germans would at least respect our non-combatant status.
Oh, that would forever foreshadow World War II right there.
Literally.
War must be impersonal, Lady Lewis, or we would not be so enamored of it.
Do you mean to say that we would stop killing each other if we were all properly introduced? That makes sense, doesn't it? Do you suppose, for instance, anyone who knew...
What she say about Annette, the woman, what she say?
You would think that the Germans would at least respect our non-combatant status. I mean, I find it unsettling that someone who I have never met should try to take my life and the life of my children. Do you suppose, for instance, anyone who knew Lady Lewis and her children would willingly do them harm? I should hope not. Although, it's hard to be liked by everyone.
I'm sure you haven't an enemy in the world.
But except for the German Navy. For some reason, they don't much care for me.
Now, I don't know who the name of this lady is, but I'm going to have to make a very big criticism about what she wore, because I don't know what she's wearing beneath, but it seems to me that by the way she's dressing, so she's dressed in a 1920s costume rather than actual 1916 attire. So I definitely think that the dress, the dressing and the headdress, really, unless they have evidence to prove this, if it's right for 1916 standards, the costume is very inaccurate. Sorry, but it really is.
That costume is just the gist of the movie. Extremely inaccurate.
Exactly, because it just doesn't make sense, because you think the Britannic was sailing in the 1920s and not earlier than that, so they just can't get it right. Even though it was a low budget film, they just can't get the costumes right, really, and it always really, really annoys me.
Perhaps they did the time warp tonight.
Let's do the time warp again.
That's gonna be a soundboard. Can I also point out that the Britannic would not be sailing through a storm? Like, she would have been at Naples around that time frame, because Captain Bartlett does not want to send a ship out to...
The Britannic was steaming through a storm. On the 20th, as I said, as they left Naples, the storm did come back, and it did rise again, and the ship was rocking, and it was rocking until at least the 20th, and it seemed to subside. Just sort of in the early evening, morning sort of time, say morning of the night of the 21st, it seemed to calm down, and it, sunlight, and it all went warm again. So it was, yes. So she was steaming through a storm at this point.
Understandable.
Oh yeah, she also passed at Aquitania, which was actually storm damaged, and ironic enough, the nurses on there actually did say, glad we weren't on that ship. Little did they know.
Miss Campbell.
Captain Reynolds. He has a button missing on his jacket. Well, that doesn't mean he's the officer we're looking for. I mean, anyone can lose a button. It doesn't have to be him.
Why don't we ask him?
Sorry. I didn't want this to happen.
Is this what you meant by war being impersonal?
Can you tell me where you keep your ether, Doctor?
Ether?
Yes, I see. Mix it.
What is that man to sit? What is he doing on the ship? The man who sits there.
Oh, the chief officer?
That's a good question.
Oh, okay.
Usually hospital ships have a chief officer that's in charge of the medical operations on board.
Makes sense.
Okay. Yeah.
This movie is just a mess.
Oh,
Jay, do you want to explain a bit more about the job positions?
Oh, he's a doctor.
Yeah, the man in the seat is the doctor, but the guy that was in charge of the RAMC was a guy called Colonel Anderson. He was in charge of the RAMC. He played quite a pivotal role in the sinking. When the ship was going down, when he actually picked Bartlett up out of the water when Bartlett had swam off the ship when he walked into the water. As the bow, as the bridge went under, he was pulled into the port motor launch. But he, the funny thing is, Anderson. I have actually got Anderson's account. I've got his testimony, and he mentions about seeing one of the quartermasters who'd gone down earlier in the sinking to go and fetch some bread for the lifeboats, and they saw this quartermaster jump into the water as the ship was going down. So he'd been down this whole time in the pantry, picking up bread for the boats, and by the time he came up, the ship was rolling over, and he jumped in. He just dropped the bread and just jumped into the water. And the person that was in charge of the nurses, the VADs and the nurses, was was a lady called matron Annie Dowse, matron Annie Dowse, Elizabeth Annie Dowse, who was in charge of the nurses, and she was quite a stern lady, but she was quite a fair lady. Matrons on board hospitals, on hospital ships, or even in hospitals in general, they were in charge of the wards and they were in charge of the nurses, and so they were the boss. So if you'd be kind of scared of the matron, because sometimes matrons have this sort of, I don't know, thing about them where they're miserable and stern.
Would they be like the drill sergeant from Full Metal Jacket? Then?
Yeah. So matron Andy Dowse, she treated her nurses. Yeah. So she treated her nurses like her children, I suppose. She really did take them under their wing and that. But Violet wasn't as pleased with matron, because after the sinking, Violet was on land, and Violet she'd suffered a head injury, and she'd been really badly injured in the sinking, and she was also throwing up insulation, cork insulation from the Britannic, as she was in the water, and she was throwing this up all night, and she said it was just a dreadful, horrible taste. And the matron Annie Dowse knocked on the door, and Violet had a toothbrush, and the matron just went, "Oh, where did you get that toothbrush from?" Didn't ask how Violet was or how she was doing. So Violet didn't have a very good thing to say about the matron at all. But also Sheila mentions how when she was on the lifeboat, they went into the wreckage of the Britannic. So the ship had gone down, and all they could see was boards, chairs, and everything floating on the water. And one of the occupants in her lifeboat actually picked a chair, like a back of a chair, from one of the chairs that was floating in the water. So it was obviously broken, but they picked the back up, and that still belongs, and it's still in the Mitchell family. The back of it's one of the it looked like a second class chair, and this is how stern and strict the matron was on the Britannic. She put boards up on the deck saying that nurses were not allowed to be on the same deck as the officers, the RAMC, so the soldiers, because the matron didn't want the nurses sort of talking or having a romantic relationship or anything with the RAMC, because that's how sort of protective she was, how strict she was. And when the Britannic
that didn't apply to this movie. Clearly, that rule didn't apply to the movie.
No, and when the Britannic sank, and her lifeboat Sheila's lifeboat was going through the wreckage, she saw one of these boards floating on the water, and one of the gentlemen that was in the boat with her, he said, "Well, I'm surprised the old Dane didn't put a sign up that doctors and nurses and the RMC should drown on different sides of the ship." She just made a comment, and Sheila didn't dare laugh because the matron was just behind her, and I'm sure the matron wouldn't have been very happy with that. But some daring chap did say, "Well, I'm surprised the old Dane didn't put up on the ship, on the decks, that that people, the nurses should drown on different sides of the vessel."
That's just funny.
I sent a picture to my head.
It is funny. But yeah, it was the hospital ships were not as strict as troop ships, but they still had routines and duties that they had to undertake. I mean, I remember hearing a story from, it was either I think it was Sheila, or it might have been Ada Garland actually, where they had to make around 500 beds in a day, and they had to get it done. And, you know, that was their task. They had to make 500 beds a day. And just undressing them and undoing them. It was kind of strict, and they had to stick to their job. And the matron would have made sure of that. You know, so... But there wouldn't have been just one doctor, don't get me wrong. There wouldn't have just been one doctor on board the ship. But there was one called Dr. Goodman. It was, Goodman, I think. Yeah, Goodman. He had an interesting account, because when the Britannic left on her maiden voyage in Liverpool, the doctor said that a couple of his wards were flooding, and they were just going out across into the Irish Sea, and a couple of his wards were flooding. At least two of his wards, because of a leaky pressure. It was a leaky valve that had broken in the ship's water tank, and also one of the portholes were leaking.
They also say to open the portholes, the doctors.
Yes. Oh, yeah, we'll get onto that in the sinking.
Yeah.
But yeah, in the sinking, the doctors, they did not open them personally. They ordered the nurses to open them.
The nurses.
And then the nurses left them open. But I will say that the portholes were a contribution. They weren't a real direct factor to a sinking. It just escalated things. It made us sink faster, yes.
It just made things worse.
This is the bridge. What's going on down there? Why are the bulkhead doors being opened?
Well, for a start, the Britannic did not have that panel on the bridge at all. She did not have that bulkhead panel. That is definitely taken from the Titanic movie, because even the Titanic didn't have that panel. So where they got, I mean, I could only think they got that from the 1997 film, because that wasn't there.
What panel? What is the panel?
The bulkhead door indicator panel.
Oh, you can see which one is closed.
Yeah, no, that wasn't there.
Yeah.
Why did Titanic movie also had it?
She didn't have it.
Yeah.
Why did the movie have it, is what he's asking.
Yeah. Because it wasn't there in real life.
Do you know any ships that did have that sort of equipment, Jake?
No. I only know the Olympic class did not. Well, at least the Titanic and the Britannic didn't have it. And there would have been no way, because he's gonna. You'll see a scene in a minute where he actually uses an axe to basically disconnect the electricity. So he smashes the cable, the electric cable, and that wasn't even a feature on the. It was just basically it was three ways you could connect. You could shut these watertight bulkheads. Was either float under the floor plates, electrically done through the bridge, or you'd be able to manually close them. But there wouldn't have been. I don't think there would have been that electric cable been exposed. You'll see in a moment.
I have heard conspiracy nuts say that Violet Jessup could have been the one who sank the Britannic in a way, because she was on all three of the sisters during their disasters. So I've heard people try to lay out she was the one responsible for all three of the Olympic class disasters. It's kind of funny to see in this movie that technically the person who's Violet Jessup literally fired the shot that sank Britannic. I just find that amusing.
Oh, and little correction. Wow, everyone's got their hands up. First of all, right.
Yeah, we've all got our hands up. Now, I think I know the reason why is because we got to talk about the sinking within itself, and this is going to be the longest times that everyone's going to pause and talk. So if you are watching the video, whether it's on live premiere or if it's not, please bear with us because we got a lot of information we want to share as well, especially for those who really are dedicated to Britannic. Now, I was going to talk a little bit about the mine and what happened to it, but I think we're going to let Jake have this one. Jake, take it away.
Yes, U-73 was laying mines around Malta and in the Zia Channel. And she laid mines around October 1916, so just a month before Britannic entered those waters. Now, mines do not discriminate. They will sink anything that comes across their path. But I will stress that the mines were not laid there to specifically sink hospital ships, or they were not there to sink hospital ships. They were there to sink naval traffic coming in and out of the Zia Channel because it was a busy channel. But unfortunately, Britannic did come across one of these mines, and like I said, they do not discriminate. The mine, you see, the British were unaware that the Germans could have or did have the technology to lay mines in such deep waters, but they did, and they were not going to tell the British that. It was kind of a secret. Unfortunately, ships were being sunk around that area. In particular, there was the HMS Russell, which was a battleship that had been struck by one of U-73's mines near Malta, and it had rolled over, and she's still upside down to this day. So basically, the guns, the heavy guns, rolled her over. So she's upside down, and another vessel called the Bertigala was in the Zia Channel just a week before the Britannic was. But unfortunately, what happened is when the Bertigala struck a mine on the 14th of November 1916, the French crew and on board said that that they had been torpedoed, that they'd saw a periscope, and they were actually firing at what they thought was a periscope, a U-boat. But it turned out they'd actually struck one of the mines, and she was torn in two, so she sank in two pieces, killing only one person on board. But unfortunately, because the French crew thought they'd been torpedoed instead of mined, the British were unaware that the ship had been mined. Otherwise, they'd have deemed those waters unsafe, and they would have saved the Britannic because they would have mine-swept the area. But also the Russell crew on board did not say they were mined. Again, they said they were torpedoed. So again, if they had been told that they would have deemed those waters, that area, completely unsafe, which would have prevented the Britannic probably not striking one of the mines. The mine struck on the starboard side of Britannic between 2 and 3 holds. At this time, the bulkhead doors were left open. They were wide open, and that was because there was a change in staff, firemen and greasers. It gave them easy access. Usually this would be against war rules. But unfortunately, these doors were wide open, and because these doors were wide open, the doors were jammed. One of the doors, at least, was jammed in the full open position, and that was between boiler room 5 and the fireman's tunnel. There was another one that was open, which was between boiler room 6 and 5, but we do not know why that was left open. We don't think that was due to the warping of the ship, because we do believe the ship was warped. But I do have to stress that the mine only damaged probably 4 compartments, which is below Britannic safety. But unfortunately, as we mentioned earlier, that the doctors had ordered the nurses to open the portholes on the lower decks, on E deck, which would normally be about 25 feet above water level. Unfortunately, the Britannic sank enough to breach these these portholes, and unfortunately that hastened the sinking. But there was so many other incidents. But so the mine was laid by U-73 in October 1916. I won't go into too much because I will kind of go into great detail about the Britannic sinking. I don't know whether Says wants me to do that.
We're nerds. We're nerds. This is what we do here. We love talking about history.
We have the nerd power. We'll definitely got to load into the thinking. Oh, I knew you were going to go for the meow on the soundboard, Leah. Very good. Jolly good. But so we'll definitely go into more detail as the sinking comes along, really, because that's like what I said before. There's going to be a lot of pausing in this one. So, so little heads up there.
Inform the Admiralty we have been torpedoed or have hit a mine, and I want a full damage report immediately.
Aye, sir.
Oh, can we also mention that Charles Bartlett was about to take a bath and he was still in his pajamas around that time?
Literally.
After the Britannic struck a mine?
Literally.
There was also not fire.
Yeah, there was definitely not fire. There was kind of like an explosion, but it was so wrong at the beginning as well because water was just seen creeping along the floor. That didn't happen because with a mine like that, it would have instantly flooded one of the boiler rooms because when the Titanic sank, the iceberg pounded the hole and a rush of water didn't go down below, but it just went as high up by the boilers, near the top of the boilers. So with the Britannic, you would have expected the same thing, given how big the mine was, but never flooding just down below like that, really. This is not really that 100% great, and there was no fire on board either. So I think this was really for dramatic purposes, and especially given the detail of how things are reacting. So fire for one character means anger and worry, while water is just water. And I think it's not, I won't say it's lazy, but it is for like characteristic energy and feedback, but it doesn't really work out in that way.
As you said, there was no fire. Now it's interesting because Archie George, he was actually on the deck above where the mine struck. He said that what happened was there was this huge explosion, and there was like a gas in the air, like a mist, which probably came from the mine itself, because usually when mines go off, they actually give off a gas. And he said it was blinding, and he says there was this inrush of water, and one of the crew members was actually washed from one compartment to another. And he only made it out just as he just going up a ladder.
And what was his name? I forgot it.
I don't know I can't remember his name off the top of my head.
Now.
But he was washed straight from one compartment. There was that much of an inrush of water that it just pushed him from one compartment to the next. Also, fifth officer, the fifth officer was actually in his cabin. And he was actually blown. He was actually thrown across his room. That's how violent it was. He was thrown across his cabin. And it's just interesting because it's a bit like the Titanic, really, because it depending where you were on the ship. If you was further back, you probably wouldn't have felt it as much. But if you was further forward, you'd have felt it. It would have been very violent.
What's the name? Bert Smith? Bert Smith?
That's him, yes, Bert Smith, yes. He was the one that was thrown from one compartment to another.
He was very close.
That's right, and he managed to escape through one of the ladders. But as I was saying, that it all depending where you were on the ship. I mean, the people in the dining room in particular, like Violet Jessup and everything, they didn't feel it, apart from that they said that it was like plates crashing, or glass smashing. Wow. And the ship seemed to sort of vibrate. But it, like I say, it depends at where you were on the ship. But like but like for instance, like the fifth officer, he had a totally different sort of experience to the guy that to the people in the dining room, because he said he was thrown across his cabin. That's how violent it. But it's just amazing how interesting, like with the Titanic, depending where you were in the vessel. Archie Jewell said once the mist cleared that they made their way through, but he said that someone as he was standing behind this door, someone ran through and actually knocked him on the head, and he was bleeding down one side of his face. He said that he had to be bandaged up. He said he looked like Old Nelson, as he called it. He said he sort of kind of made a joke out of it. He said he was like Old Nelson. So, but yeah, there was this enforced rush of water, but it is probably believed that the entire bottom, the forward end of the bottom of the ship was torn away, or at least was damaged in some way. Yeah.
When the mine hit, which officer was on the bridge to sail the ship?
It was McTavish. I could never pronounce his name. He was on the bridge, and so was Robert.
Is it McTavish?
McTavish, that's it. I can never pronounce his name.
What is the number? First one, second one.
The fifth officer was in his cabin.
Yeah.
I'll have to get his name because I can't. I'm 32 and my mind isn't what it used to be. I can never remember things off
It's okay.
I'm 21 and my mind is just as fucked. My mind's just as knackered.
Exactly.
I'm only one.
Well, to be fair though, with the McTavish, I don't actually blame him, but I know that I've got a dad who lived in Scotland, so that's how I got the pronunciations from. Even though I don't sound very Scottish,
but he didn't know there was a mine. He didn't know that.
That's it. Fifth Officer Gordon Bell Fleming. Fielding. Gordon Bell Fielding was the fifth officer, and as I said, he was in his cabin. And when he was in his cabin, the force of the explosion just threw him across his cabin. It just knocked him off his feet. That's how. You know.
Oh yeah, Gordon.
Yeah. Gordon Fielding.
Yeah, I have a picture of him.
Yeah.
That had to have been a brutal blast. Holy hell.
But don't forget, he would have been. But don't forget, he would have been further. He would have been in the forward end of the ship, sort of like in the officer's quarters. Yeah, so he would have been quite close to where the explosion did take place. Sort of, he was further. He was forward. But that's really what happened with the explosion. But yeah, there was no fire. And can I just point out as well that this movie's got it wrong as well, because you will see that the explosion takes place on the port side of the ship, not the starboard. In real life, it was on the starboard side, which is the right-hand side of the ship, not the left, port side.
Okay, now this is inaccurate, like the rushing, because first of all, you wouldn't get anyone who was panicking to get into the lifeboats. I mean, you would have a few, but for most people, never, because with doctors and nurses, they always have to be very professional and calm during emergency situations. And second of all, no thunderstorms at the early stages of the sinking, and later we will all see, spoiler alert, the sun was rising. There's never a sun that was rising when the Britannic was sinking. The sun already rose. I mean, I know it's character life, and I know it was
how the song "Sleeping Sun Forever" is associated with Britannic because of this movie. I swear.
Exactly. But this is one thing that always annoys me. They want licensing. Characteristic licensing, not historical accuracy. No wonder Simon Mills didn't want to use his name in the credits. It's just lazy. Really is lazy. I'm terribly sorry. And Jake said in the chat, who said that? Jess said that she hits the mine at 8:12 a.m. That's correct, Jess. And Jake always says Robert Hume was on the bridge with Macintosh when the mine struck. So, Jake, can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, as I was saying that before, that it was Chief Officer Hume and Fourth Officer McTavish who was on the bridge at the time of the explosion when the mine struck. As DK pointed out, that Charles Bartlett wasn't on the bridge at the time. He was taking a bath. He was actually taking a bath, or at least he was preparing to take a bath, and he was still dressed in his pajamas. And we only know this through the testimony of Violet Jessup, because when Captain Bartlett was pulled out of the water in the port motor launch by Colonel Anderson, Violet, who had been pulled into that boat only earlier on, pointed out or had mentioned that it was kind of funny to see the master of the ship, Captain Bartlett, still dressed in his pajamas and his PJs at the time of the when he was pulled out of the water. So he never actually got dressed in his officer's uniform.
I wish there was a photo of what he looked like in his pajamas, just because.
Yeah. It'd have been soaking wet.
Accuracy, please.
Very soaking wet. And because she just found it quite amusing, which is kind of interesting to think that Violet went through all this trauma, and to think that she could just make a slight joke out of what that she found it kind of funny that the captain was still dressed in his PJs and his pajamas, which is kind of humorous to think about, to think that the captain was dressed in his PJs.
He didn't have time to change his uniform. All he's got to do is put his captain's hat on and just do what he needs to do.
Captain's hat with pajamas, that would be an interesting combo.
That's it. But to be fair, though, he didn't really have the time to get ready in like his uniform, because when when that mine hit, it was all action stations. He had to do his duty, Bartlett did. So in one way, I can really understand in a professional point of view, because it's get up, get going, and make sure everyone's off as much as possible.
Sir, damage is in the port bow near one of the coal bunkers. We're taking on water fast.
Our nearest landfall is Kia. We'll make a run for it and try and beat you there. That's more than...
Yeah, I just want to point out that when the explosion took place, because of the ship's motion when it rose out of the water and it just slightly came out of the water, slightly the bow, the impact or the motion of that kind of whipped the cables that were connected from mast to mast, the forward mast to the aft mast, which was the cable for the wireless the wireless machine to send out messages. Now, lucky enough that they were able to send out a distress call, but they weren't able to receive a reply back. So what happened was there was a connection lost in the silent room. So in this, he's sending out a distress call, but he will not hear a reply back. So at this point, Britannic does not know that anything's coming to the rescue, because they just can't hear anyone. Simply, they could not hear anyone. So you'll see that the wireless operator in this will tell the captain or the officers on board that he's heard a reply. No, he won't, because in real life he wouldn't have done. They wouldn't have done.
Yeah, it'd be like that.
7 miles. Can we make it, sir?
There are over 1,100 souls on board. The nearer they are to land, the greater the chance of survival.
Aye, sir.
Lady Lewis! Miss Campbell! William was gone to find you. He ran off when I was tending to Sarah. Are you all right? I'll get him. You take Sarah out and detain. Do find him. Find him. Miss Campbell! Miss Campbell! William?
William is missing and I can't find him.
I hope you find him.
Oh yeah, I just also want to point out is that two things that he
I see
said
which
is
was.
that Captain Bartlett wanted to beach the Britannic to Kia Island, and the rescue ships were the HMS Scourge, the Heroic, the Foxhound, and the Foresight. Foresight. I always get those two mixed up. And of course, they were not 7 miles away from Kia. There would have been a great distance.
Ladies, no cause for panic. This is merely a precaution. We shall board the lifeboats only if the captain gives the order to abandon ship.
What's he waiting for?
We're making for the island of Kia, 7 miles away. If we can beach her, we shan't have to use the boats.
And they used it again. They used 7 miles away from Kia. No, in actuality, you're 3 miles away.
Those Greek boys are going to be terribly dazzled by the sight of so many beautiful women. Some of them will require medical attention.
You asking for volunteers? William! William? William!
I will point out that the Britannic wouldn't have made 8 miles or even 7 miles for that fact, because, for instance, the Britannic was in such a bad condition to the point that they were not even able to steer the vessel in the way that they would normally have been able to steer the vessel. The Britannic's steering had been lost. The explosion had caused a disconnect of the rudder somehow. But also what had happened is that the cables to the telegraphs were also damaged in some way, and they were not able to use the normal telegraphs, the normal engine telegraphs. So they had to use the emergency telegraph to actually send signals to the engine room. And the engine room was quite important in this, because although they had lost complete control of the vessel, or almost complete control of the vessel, because of the disconnect of the rudder, they had to use the engines on the port side to actually push the Britannic towards Kia, because at that point she was not pointing towards Kia, she was heading for Lemnos. So they were not pointing in the direction of Kia. So they had to push the Britannic. And now this is not done normally. This wouldn't normally have been done. It's just not the normal way. But that's the only way they could do it. And because of this, and because the Britannic was filling so fast that she was becoming top heavy. She was becoming heavy, so they were not able. So she wasn't moving very quickly. She was only moving maybe 3 degrees at a time. It wasn't a lot, and we have to remember as well that the Britannic, from the point of explosion to the point where she sank, she'd done a complete 180 U-turn. She'd done a 180 turn, and they actually kept overshooting Kia Island. They overshot Kia Island, so the bow, by the time the sinking happened, the final moments, she wasn't exactly pointing directly at Kia, because now the Kia Island was now on the port side.
I had always heard it was 8 miles, and I don't know where that 8 miles originates from, but that's what I'd always heard. So this is completely new to me to hear.
If you think about it, with the movement of the ship, with the portholes being open and flooding the vessel, and then with the steering loss, she would not have made 7 miles or even 8. She wouldn't have made it.
Yeah, because I'd always heard 8 miles.
Let's put it this way.
Now I'm curious on where that came from.
Let's put it this way. She couldn't even make 4 to 3 miles. So how could she make 8 miles? It's not going to happen.
That's a good point.
So no, it's the 7 and 8 miles, because it just purely how badly the Britannic was in, the condition she was in. If we have to remember that although Captain Bartlett wasn't a ship designer, although he loved the Britannic, he'd seen the Britannic from construction, he wasn't a ship designer. Unlike on Titanic, they had Thomas Andrews on board. So they could get it. So Captain Smith could get a realistic overview or view of what was going on with Titanic, where Bartlett didn't. He was only getting reports backwards and forth from crew who had gone down below and saw the flooding. So he could only get an idea, a sort of an idea of what was going on. He didn't get an actual real view of what was actually happening to the Britannic. So if he'd got a realistic view, he probably wouldn't have even moved the Britannic. But as he was moving the vessel, he's actually doing more damage because he's actually generating more water into the vessel with the forward motion, which then is now flooding the vessel even faster. And you know, he did this till at least 9 a.m. in the morning, just moving the vessel. There was one point where he did stop the vessel to abandon the vessel because the flooding had quickened, and he sort of stopped and let people off. But then as the ship stopped and it was stationary, the flooding seemed to slow down, and the sinking seems to have slowed down. So then he moved the ship again, and unfortunately by this point, the forward end of the ship, or at least the forecastle, is now going to be taking on water, and that ship is not going to make it to Kia. So
bro just wanted to save his ship.
So no, my view, realistically, she would not have made that amount of mileage because how bad she was. People forget how bad Britannic was.
Well, if I can find the resources that say 8 miles that I remember hearing, I will send them your way so you can fact check them for other inaccuracies.
Yeah, because people don't realize how bad the Britannic, the condition the Britannic was in at the time of the explosion. She was in a very, very bad way. She had a massive hole in her. Plus, the mine had already took out 4 compartments alone, right up to the 4-peak tank. So she, in some ways, she was probably worse than the Titanic, because the Titanic had very small gashes, slashes in the metal, where the metal had separated the steel plates. Where Britannic, a mine can do a lot of damage, especially to a ship that is designed to be a passenger ship, not a battleship. So she isn't armoured, albeit she had a double hull. But that doesn't mean anything to a mine. So,
as I said earlier, be like a sea mine. Don't discriminate.
Mr. Townsend, my son is still aboard the ship. Miss Campbell is out looking for him.
I have no doubt that someone will see him, madam, and bring him topside.
Right.
I will repeat, there were no passengers on board the Britannic. Jeez.
Simone.
Thank you. That did not happen.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I just listened to this thing and I thought, oh God, more artistic licensing. But I just want to make a little point, though, that even though there were not passengers on board, there were young adolescent boys, which were the scouts. And Jake did explain in part 1. So if anyone wondered, were there any young boys on board, like this little one, even though he's a passenger, then yes, there were scouts on board.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Jake said that there were no patients either. It was all crew members, all staff nurses, and all of that. But that scene there, it was really dramatic. Really dramatic. It's like the Lion King moment, even though it didn't really exist. No, Jess, do you want to add something quick?
Lion King
and also
moment.
the captain did not give up much fast in the movie.
No, Captain didn't give up on his ship.
Trying. He didn't give up.
No, they seem to have taken a lot of details from Lusitania for this movie. Yeah. It's basically just what happened to Lusitania, but in a different location with a different ship. It's just what happened to Lusitania.
They should have renamed it Lusitania instead of Britannic. Just saying.
It should have been about the Lusitania. It would have worked so much better. And been at least somewhat more accurate.
But not 100%, right. Not 100%.
Yeah, not at all. 100%. But it would have been more accurate than the...
Yeah.
I can't. I'm stuck under something. Go on, Take William and go. You're wasting time. Go!
Onto the boats! Quickly now! Everyone onto the boats!
No, my son is still aboard this ship.
My apologies, madam, but you must leave this ship. We will find your son and send him
My
after you.
son is still below. Get your hands off me. Mama!
Your little girl needs you now. Your son will be along.
No reason to panic, ma'am. Steady on now.
You, sir, so much for your unsinkable ship.
He was not unsinkable.
Bro's face is my reaction to this movie.
Did
My
they mention
God.
the word unsinkable again?
Yeah, they
I'm
made.
fixing to rage.
they-
honestly.
Oh, yeah,
Y'all
yeah.
want to know how much I want to rage at that line. They never said the Britannic was unsinkable.
Literally,
God, and
as
now
you
they
said
make me
earlier,
wanna
DK,
rage.
now we know how historic travels feels.
And I don't
Exactly.
understand.
Do your homework, production. Do your homework. Right, Jake, quick.
Us watching this movie
Right.
is like historic travels watching Brightside.
Right, I'm going to point out what they actually said, a quote that they used in the Shipbuilder magazine when the ship was being launched. They never,
Yeah.
the builders, the crew, no one ever said that ship was unsinkable.
She was perfectly
Because
something.
they learnt that from the Titanic. You know, they called the Titanic. Well, and even then again, even the builders, they were confident that the Titanic could stay afloat, but they were. The builders were confident that the ship was. It would take a lot to take the ship down. That, you know, even Thomas Andrews on the Titanic did point out how the ship could flood in, you know, certain sections, and the ship would stay afloat. But what happened with the Titanic was a worst case scenario, you know. But the builders were very aware that that ship could potentially go down. No ship designer is ever going to think that their creation is unsinkable. It was actually the press that actually got hold of the unsinkable thing and just sold it that way.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, in those days, it's like, I suppose it's like today, people listen to the press. So, you know, they're going to listen to the narrative. But anyway, this is the quote they used. In the new Britannic, we see both in design and construction as perfect a specimen of man's creative power as it is possible to create. Hopefully this time they got it right. That's the exact quote they used in the Shipbuilder magazine.
Yeah.
Never said unsinkable. Or they never said that she couldn't go down. The
They
Britannic
also not say practically unsinkable. They also not say that.
No, and the Britannic was designed to stay afloat with 6 compartments flooded. 6. 2 more than Titanic.
Yeah.
So
4 more and the Lusitania, 4 more.
Clearly what happened to the Britannic was catastrophic because of not only the mine explosion, but also the portholes being opened and also the captain moving the vessel.
Yeah.
That's what sent Britannic down. It was a catastrophic damage to the vessel that the Britannic just could not. I'm not saying that she couldn't have survived at all. If the portholes had been closed, she may have been able to be beached.
Yeah.
But we also have to take into consideration that also they lost control of the vessel because they lost.
I think this that
lost
is the
command.
big situation. I think
So-
that.
So if the portholes had been closed and that they had control of the vessel, she may have survived.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But because as we know, as I said, that the forward end, it took out 4 compartments, the mine itself. But we have to also take into consideration that maybe as well the double bottom was also flooding, because if the mine had struck low on the lower part of the ship, maybe the double bottom was flooding.
Was there
Good
double
point.
bubble where the mine hit?
Good
Yes.
point.
Yep.
Oh, also.
Yes, because the double hull, you know, connects to the bottom, you know. So, but even Simon Mills himself and everyone I've spoken to believes that possibly that the bottom was blown out where the mine had struck. You know, she probably could have been flooding from underneath too, which is also what happened to the Titanic, because she was flooding from underneath in boiler room number 4. So if the Titanic could have flooded from the bottom by damaging the double bottom, it's possible the Britannic could have done as well. But it's also believed, it is a theory that maybe the double hull also flooded too, because between the 2 layers of steel, there's a space, a gap.
Yeah.
And it's possible that because the double bottom had been compromised, I mean the double hull had been compromised,
First one.
that the flooding could have gone through between the two layers. That could have also dragged her down too, which could have put weight. That is a theory that could have happened. It's possible.
Yeah.
But
and also, if the captain did not beach her, she will sink slower.
Yeah, but today yeah, I mean, it is possible that if the ship had been kept stationary, that she probably would have sank slower.
Yeah.
But you know, like I say, everything just sort of what could have gone wrong went wrong. Britannic.